What you know about PE fitness? A more in-depth look on Dylan Gemelli's business. The number one channel for performance enhancement. If you searching for muscle advance, can't learn it from a book or a pamphlet. Tune in for the answers, cause your body's too precious to take any chances.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Dylan Gemelli Podcast. I am extremely excited this morning. My guest today, I met at Mr. Olympia, and ever since I met him, I've been dying to have him on the podcast. All the way from the United Kingdom, I would like to welcome Mike Kocsis.
Hi, Dylan. Nice. Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this as well.
Absolutely.
So, it was really good that we had a chance to meet at the Mr. Olympia. That was quite an exciting event, the round table discussion, which I think you said we need to do more of, and that's in the works for next year.
Yes, that was, and I want to talk about that definitely during the podcast, because that was a big experience for me and awesome to be a part of. And that's what drew me to you, was listening to you speak there. So we got a ton to talk about, and I'm excited for everybody listening because they're going to learn a ton from you. And I think this conversation is going to be tremendous. So everybody, like I said, I met Mike at the Mr. Olympia event, and we're going to get into that. But I want to talk first about his company is called Balance My Hormones. And so, Mike, I'd like, if you would, to kind of explain what Balance My Hormones is, what kind of got you into wanting to do that, and just let's expound on that a little bit, because it's certainly intriguing.
Sure. Yeah. So Balance My Hormones is going to be the 8th year in May this year. So I started back in 2016. And, living in the UK at the time, there weren't a lot of options, and there still really aren't. You've got the National Health Service, which is the public healthcare, which most people would turn to for healthcare. But they didn't see this men's issue, low testosterone, hormone imbalance, as something that they wanted to treat. And it was very much restrictive in how they're treating it. And so I thought, with my experience, I had gone to some NHS doctors, and it wasn't what was needed. It wasn't what I was used to, because in the past I'd also been treated by doctors in the USA. So I wanted to offer what I always joke and say, American style TRT, but with British sensibilities to the UK market. And so I founded Balance My Hormones. Now I struggled with the name at first. I've actually come up with the name in 2015. And then it took a while to put the business plan together. But I played around with different names. Like one of them was, keepyourpeckerup.com. And I thought that's just too much towards the erectile dysfunction market. And I think if you're in the UK, you might know that's kind of a common expression to just say, keep your spirits high. But Balance My Hormones, I tested it, and it went really, really well. People thought that was nice, because I don't want to just be focused, or we don't want to be focused on just men. Even though that's really in vogue, you say, oh, I'm a men's clinic. Well, yeah, we are a men's clinic, but also a women's clinic, and we do both. And we're able to help both men and women balance their hormones. And we just didn't want to focus on the androgens only, but we wanted to focus across the board on other hormones that are all affected. And it's all intertwined. So, sometimes, and we can get into it later, but if you've got one hormone out of whack, you do have to look at the others. You absolutely have to look at the others and how they can be balanced, thyroid, prolactin, and so on. So, excuse me. So I started it, and my vision is Balance My Hormones is a clinic, but it's also a platform company. So we're always looking for other doctors that want to partner with us, other patients that would seek some coaching and support, other HRT, TRT coaches that want to work with us. We're always looking to incorporate them into our brand and our platform, which has grown tremendously since 2016. So I'm really looking forward to the coming year. We've got lots of different options. And then on top of Balance My Hormones, we have our sister company, The Hormonist, which is our pharmacy that supports everything with Balance My Hormones. And
yes.
So quite like that name as well, portmanteau, blend of two words, hormones and chemist, or hormones and pharmacist. And, we're really excited about the coming year for The Hormonist as well, where we'll be starting compounding this year. So, but unlike the US, we don't do sterile compounding. It's only for creams and capsules and that sort of thing.
Got it.
So,
Nice.
But yeah, what I say, one more thing about Balance My Hormones makes us different is that we really take the time, and I've spent money on staff that are, either experienced ex-doctors, ex-nurses, medical students that either didn't finish or started their medical program, that have a knowledge and passion for HRT and TRT, that when a patient calls, it's not an extra charge. When they're patients, they can get support around the treatment. And we also have, they act as patient advocates as well. And some of our staff are also, TRT coaches or experienced with TRT themselves. So or HRT. So it's very relatable to the patient. So whilst they can get any doctor's appointment when they want, they can also contact the coach or the case manager, we call them, to get their support. So that's one of the things that would make us different to many of the others out there.
Now, I was just going to ask you that because a lot of, especially, and I don't know how familiar you are with the ones in the United States here, but there's, anti-aging clinics, they pop up everywhere. And it's like, it's almost like, okay, so I don't know how familiar you are with this, but if you wanted to get like a medical marijuana card, for example, you would schedule an appointment, you'd get on a Skype call or something like this. They'd say, so what's troubling you today? Does your back hurt? Just convincing you what to say to get you to say it. And then they sign you over whatever it is that you need. Same with the TRT clinic. And then they never talk to you again or see you again. It's just a monthly fee or bill. Here, we'll give you this. I mean, they're putting people on TRT with, 500 and 600 levels. And we're going to talk about that. But generally speaking, that doesn't require TRT. It's just whoever wants it. And there's no coaching, no monitoring. They'll write you a script for an aromatase inhibitor. Some of them are writing scripts for steroids, for Anavar, for Deca. I mean, it's insane what I've seen and what goes on. So you guys kind of operate at a far more professional level as opposed to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are regulated by a regulator. So unlike the United States, to be a clinic or a clinic owner, I had to interview with the regulator. We get inspected by the regulator. We have to do medical audits on the data of our patients to make sure, that what we're doing in our treatments will, match either guidelines or have evidence-based to match. So it's basically medicine, evidence-based medicine. So that's a good part of what we do. We have safeguarding procedures. So we have to make sure that there are no vulnerable patients that are coming through the door. We have to check for photo ID. There's a whole form that people fill out, including all the potential benefits and risks of HRT or TRT treatment. And that's where they get that initial call with the coach or the case manager to let them know of all these. And they can ask loads of questions in the beginning. And then they would, if they want to proceed and they've got two different blood levels, demonstrating low testosterone in the morning, that usually if it looks like they have the symptoms, and we use the guidance from the ISSAM, the International Society of Aging Males. I think Abraham Morgenthaler has also been part of the committee that helped write this guidance, because testosterone is a strange thing. There's the total number, but then there's also the free, or we like to use a calculated free, or compare the calculated to the free if someone gives us a blood level that has a free on it. Because what you find is that what really matters is what gets into your cells and what activates the androgen receptor. And if you have very little free testosterone, you'll find patients that can be symptomatic.
Right.
So it's a guide between the total and the free. But yeah, this is kind of part of the process. And then for the follow-up, if a patient is deemed a candidate for TRT and they go ahead with it, after the doctor's consultation, they'll get the medications in a hybrid subscription model. So, whatever's needed for the treatment, including, their injection supplies, or, if they're using creams, that's all packaged and sent by the pharmacy. And then they'll have access, really as much as they need to the case manager. And then we have preset times for when they have to get their blood tests done. So we like to see a blood test done, between 6 and 10 weeks for the initial one to see how the levels are. Then we look at 6 months, 1 year, and then yearly thereafter. Though we do encourage patients, they want to get tested at 18 months. That's absolutely fine. And our support service, because I've said before, we're like 3 companies in one, with the clinic, with the pharmacy bit, and we're also a blood testing service. So it's all included. And when you go to our website, you're not filling out a form to say, okay, I want to order some testosterone, I want to order some HCG. It doesn't work like that. It's, we've taken the model that, yes, we can do things online and do them safely, but we don't want it to be the point where it's so automated. So we deliberately slow down the process for the reason of safety, and also for the reason to give them that more personalized feel. So yes, you can do some of this from the comfort of your own home, except obviously getting blood tests.
Right.
But you can still have, easy access, because after COVID, no one really wants to travel around if they don't have to. And we've all gotten used to the ability to do calls like this.
Right.
And so we find it very, very beneficial to do it. And I think it's been worked out really, really well. And we have a growing patient base. So we try to give that support all the way through, and then and always do the follow-ups with patients. But that's how it works. You know how patients are there sometimes.
I know.
You have to pace them up, and sometimes the end point for the patient is, I just want the medicine. They just care about. But that's not what it's about. It's about the whole support, the service. I think a lot of them don't realize, and any of them that have left to go to another company, they've come back within 6 months or so. They either dropped out of treatment, and then maybe they ventured off with another clinic, and then they end up coming back to us because they say, "Oh, I didn't like the experience there, and you guys seem to have a really good support system."
Well, and that's one of the things that's troubling to me, and I see it because what I deal with is far different than what you deal with, but I deal with constant questions of, well, what should I run for TRT? It's almost like the question of, how do I lose weight? And it's like, there's no straight way to answer that without a full analyzation of each individual, because everybody's circumstance is different. And if you don't have like what you're offering, you're putting yourself at risk. Even like, for instance, I've been coaching this for 10 years, but I would still defer to somebody like you, David Lee, that I talked to, who's like another TRT person that's more of an expert on it. I don't care how much experience, even like somebody like me has. You need to have somebody monitoring you and watching you, no matter what you think because there's so many factors that you don't realize. And that's why I liked what you just brought up about free testosterone, because I really want to focus on that, because people tend to just look at that overall test number without understanding that the free test has so much to do with how you feel and your health and the effects that it can have on you. And so what I want to ask you is, in your expert, opinion, what other factors do you look at, like on blood markers? Because obviously we look at free test, and SHBG can have a direct effect on free test. And the higher that number, the more bound up it gets, right? So what, aside from that, and you can touch on that too, what else do you look at that could possibly negatively affect a testosterone level?
So, I mean, there's various factors. So one of our premium panels and it's a comprehensive panel that we use, we start looking at the FBC, I think in the US you call it CBC. So we're looking at full blood count, including ferritin and iron studies, TIBC, because, someone can have hemochromatosis. So right there, that's a clue. So if they have hemochromatosis, there's a good linkage between hemochromatosis and testosterone deficiency. So I guess to take it back, it depends where you want to start in the process. So starting in the beginning, we got full blood count, we get the biochemistry, you look at some lipids, you can, and the reason why you would look at lipids is it ties in with thyroid. If you have hypothyroidism, you might have really high lipids, that maybe if you can balance out the thyroid hormone, you can get your cholesterol back into a normal range. We look at on the hormone profile, everything from LH and FSH to start to know whether it's a primary or secondary hypogonadism. So if the LH and FSH are really high, there's probably an issue with the testes, and as a result, you're probably not going to make much more because your body's blasting the LH and FSH. The testes just are like saying, I've had enough. This is all I'm going to make. Not going to make any more, no matter how much you blast at me. And then that could be one of the causes of the low testosterone. Sometimes you get secondary hypogonadism where, LH are very, very low. And in those cases, sometimes it could be boosted I think traditionally it's boosted with SERMs. In some cases, they work really well. In many cases, they don't, but it just depends on the individual. We've had some fantastic results from some patients early on that get a nice boost of their own natural testosterone levels with something like clomiphene. But ideally, we wish we could get, it's not the ideal. Testosterone itself is really usually better, but there are some reasons when people want to maintain fertility, and the guidelines talk about this. They do mention in the guidelines from the British Society of Sexual Medicine that, sometimes SERMs can be a good alternative, at least in the early stages when someone wants to maintain fertility. So that's why we look at LH, but there's other hormones. We look at progesterone, we look at prolactin, and we look at estradiol because, prolactin can affect your erectile function, both on treatment or before. And estradiol is important because the level's too low. That could signify that your testosterone levels are too low.
Right.
So that could be one reason. Or if it's too high, you might also have obesity, and you look at the ratio between testosterone and estradiol. So obviously we look at total testosterone because it's a benchmark, and it's also how you can derive free testosterone. Now, some will say, well, the free testosterone assay is fine. I think it depends on the technique, the LC mass spec.
Right.
You probably get a very good result for the free testosterone, but most labs don't run that particular assay. And I think you would use it as a side note. What most of the clinical trials would use is a calculated free testosterone that uses one of the equations, like the Vermillion equation. I think he was one of the endocrinologists that formulated this, where they look at your albumin, you look at your SHBG6 hormone binding globulin, which we also measure. We also get these measures or markers. We look at your total testosterone, and then you run it through the formulation to calculate the free. And by the way, you can calculate using on our website. We've got a tool on our website that both converts between US and UK and European metrics, as well as you can calculate the free testosterone at balancemyhormones.co.uk.
That's awesome.
Sorry, I don't mean to do the plug, but I thought it's kind of relevant. If people are watching and they're looking for a nice tool, they can just bookmark it and they can go to the page. There's lots of information on there they can learn about, if they want to convert the units from one to the other. So progesterone, sometimes it gives us information, but we grab it. We grab the DHEA levels as well. I'm trying to think there's a few more on there. We also look at the thyroid, but not just the TSH and the free T4. We look at the free T3, and we also have antibodies, because it kind of tells our doctors that if you've got some antibodies, you're probably not going to feel great on TRT either because you've got this issue. We also look at cortisol. We prefer morning cortisol levels because the afternoon is kind of worthless, really, because the cortisol level drops. So since we're asking patients to go and get their tests done in the morning, there should be no reason why we can't catch a morning cortisol. But if there is a doubt about any issue with cortisol, we'll have them do that 4 or 5 point saliva test for which just seems to be a decent benchmark for cortisol, where they can go throughout the day and get different samples. So that's also available. So that's our first test. I'm trying to think what else we have on there. Vitamin D is important. I think we've got a new test that's got zinc on it as well. Folate, we're looking to see if that's on the level. So because some of these other biomarkers might be low, and it could be one of the causes of your testosterone treatment. And you may not need treatment. You may just need to, up the vitamin D3. So that's something our doctors might explain to the patients, because it's hard. I mean, if you live in an area where there's not a lot of sun, and even if there is, you can't always get your vitamin D3 to be optimal.
Right. So. See, and this is what's so important, because I get this, I'm tired, I need TRT, or, my testosterone level is this, I need TRT. But there's not, just because your numbers are low does not necessarily mean you have hypogonadism, and does not necessarily mean you need TRT. And that's why all this analyzation is so important, because fixing some of the other issues could correct that. And, people.
It can. But, I've also seen on the other side where people do there's only so much you can do, even if you're a monk and you're just so fixated and focused on your health and wellness. But there's a lot of different factors that come into play,
right?
Maybe beyond someone's control, and part of it is our exposure to environmental toxins, our exposure to stressful lifestyles that we can't really get away from, and so we're already at a disadvantage when we're starting. So then the question is, do you fight fire with fire? I've said it before. Do you add the testosterone to counter the what we're all exposed to, because the way we're living isn't. I mean, unless we're off in the wild, we're not going to be as active. Right? There's some tribes out there, that are active all day, moving most of the day. 10% of their time they're sedentary, but the rest of the time they're out and about moving. And we just don't move that much every day. I mean, I've got one of these Apple Watches. I make sure I hit all my rings every day now.
Yeah.
And that really pushes you. I before I had it, I didn't realize I wasn't standing up as much, and I wasn't, getting my steps in, and wasn't burning as mmany calories. So it's really helped. And I actually brought my weight down from around 103 kilos to around, I think I weighed 98 this morning. So I was probably around 230. 240 at one point, down to I think about 115. So
nice, man. Great work.
So it's been my focus, because it's easy. Even with TRT, it's easy to get off track.
Oh, sure.
Exercise, and it's temptation. But anyway, I want to talk about, we've got to be careful not to play gatekeepers, because you see this a lot with the traditional endocrinology societies. And I've heard some endocrinologists or just their attitude is like, I'll decide if you deserve this.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
And we've heard that before. There was a doctor in the UK that is quite, how can I put it? He's got a way about him in which he makes comments, very derogatory comments towards what we're trying to do in other TRT clinics, saying that, of course men want TRT, but whether or not they, deserve TRT is another question. And if they, deserve TRT or needed TRT, they would get it from what he calls a reputable source, which is the NHS. But in reality, the hypocrite has his own private clinics, as well, treating both men and women for low testosterone, as well as the trans community as well. So it's very hypocritical to say that only this governmental body, the NHS, could provide care for men with low T, especially when there are massive waiting times at the NHS. People aren't able to even get beds. People are being treated out in the corridor of hospitals. So that's just not right. And I think that in the UK in general, there's this, it's changing. I think after COVID, because NHS was overrun, we now have a doctor's strike. It's the longest running doctor's strike. So our junior doctors have walked out. I think some of the doctors have walked out from the NHS. So they've had to cancel, surgeries and appointments. And so patients say, well, okay, I pay all this for tax, through my tax money to fund the National Health Service. But what do I get for it? And so they're now looking towards the private sector, private clinics. And the way private clinics have popped up here, it's more organic and entrepreneurial compared to what I think in the US you've got this model where you've got the insurance-based private care, and then you've got some of the TRT type clinics and some of these that go on where it could be more cash-based.
Right.
And you do have that in the UK as well. There are in the private sector, we do have the insurance-based clinics, and we have like what we've set up is a cash-based program. Though if patients do have health insurance, they can take the receipts for doctor's consultations and blood tests, and some insurances will cover those. They have to pay for the service first, and they can get reimbursed later if they have insurance in the UK. Sure.
Now, I do have this is still on topic, slightly off topic, but this is just for people here. When you and I were talking prior, you had mentioned about possibly opening something up here or considering it in the United States. Is that something still on the table?
Yeah, it's something that, it's something that's what we're looking into. I mean, some of the data I think I mentioned, we've got to say many inquiries about our service, and if we can help them from potential patients from the United States. And
yeah,
we have some partner clinics that we've done referrals to, but I think people like what we're about and how we go about doing it. And so I've always said watch this space, and there are there is a possibility that there may be ways that we can help patients in the US. Even just second opinion advice only consultations could be on the table. Obviously, in that scenario, we wouldn't be prescribing, but at least you can get a second opinion, because sometimes, and I actually have a friend in the US who, he's gone to his doctor and is a US doctor in Florida, and isn't really happy with the time that was spent with them. It was very in and out, and he spoke with a physician associate or physician assistant, which is fine. But my sister's a physician assistant, but he wanted to speak to one of the doctors, and that doctor had already had his record. So he's considering, we're kind of trialing it using our service for just a consultation device only, to see if that gives him some a second opinion. Obviously, we can send a letter, or usually when patients come through, we have we call a consent to treatment plan, which has what they're prescribed and what the recommendations are, almost like a mini report that goes on, and we send it to the patient in their portal. So, I mean, that would be some of the value add that we could do for patients in the US, but it's still early days, and so watch this space, and 2024, 2025 could be the year. But we're happy. Look, if people are interested, they should still contact us. And we can weigh that up of how we might be able to help them, because that will also help gauge, what the interest level is. But I'm always careful, because I have lots of friends in the US, and I don't want to step on any toes.
Well, yeah, but
what we would see would be more that a collaboration. So if there are existing, doctors that would want to be interested in working with us, we'd be very keen to take on discussions and working on with our platform, essentially, because we've kind of really fine-tuned it. Using some of the regulatory model that we have in the UK brings confidence to doctors in the US, because sometimes people in the UK will refer to some American outfits or even UK outfits as cowboy outfits. And so, and that's not a term of endearment.
No, it's not.
So, but, I've been approached, and they've looked at what we offer as, kind of a safe option, especially for doctors who might be running their practice but want to have a few more hours to take on hours. It's something we might be able to incorporate into a model. But again, it's really premature. But it's something that for a long time I said, no, let's just leave it. But it's hard to ignore some of the facts that have come in. Is that I think we have a really good, strong brand, and people like how we do it. And it's a nice blend of things where you've got the efficiency of how we treat, but with the personalized side of it, and the ability to talk to a case manager and book in. Or speak to the doctor when needed. Yeah,
I would love that. That would be awesome if you guys did come here, because you do it so well and so right. And it's not that there are some good places here for sure, but it's definitely, there's far more bad than good. And it's funny how you brought that up, calling it a cowboy outfit. And that's what they do that when they feel threatened, or and when people start to do stuff like that, you have to question anything that they're saying regardless. But you know how it is. That's just the way people are, especially, like I said, when they feel threatened or that they could lose business. So
it's a good point. Sorry, go on.
No, yeah. So what kind of got you into this? What drew you to this, like the studies of TRT and testosterone and hormones? Because everybody's got their own story on something personal that happened to them, or maybe it's just business or a love for it. What intrigued you so much? And was there something certain that happened to you, or just something that drew your interest to it?
No, when I was 22, I knew something wasn't quite right with my hormones. And as many young people do, I just remember there was an article, I think in Newsweek, I happened to pick up, and they're promoting androgel, or not androgel, it was the patches. This is in the 90s. And it talked about the importance of testosterone. So I got tested. I was one of those guys with borderline levels. There was a clinic, a men's clinic, and they put me on testosterone treatment. And then, but I think because of my age, the doctor got a bit scared and took me off the treatment and then left me with nothing. And the levels were actually lower than when they started, which is a cautionary tale to some young men that, you may not recover your levels, or it may take a long time, and you just will feel awful, depending on how it's done. And I wasn't offered really any, not that PCT is a magic wand, because some people think I'll do a PCT and everything's going to be okay.
No.
It may somewhat fix the symptoms, and people have no idea. Anyway, I don't want to get off target, but so I went to the doctor. Then saw another doctor. I actually ended up seeing loads of different doctors who eventually said, "Yeah, you need to be on TRT. You know, this is," and the reason is, and is why it was kind of borderline was that, looking back and from my knowledge I've gained over time was. It's kind of personal. You know what varicocele is? So we talked about that primary or a slight damage to the testes.
Yeah.
Some mild varicoceles, and most of the urologists would dismiss it, say, "Oh, it has minimal contribution to testosterone, but it can erode fertility." But I mean, the two go hand in hand, really. So I didn't really enjoy their dismissive attitude. So never really dealt with that because the testosterone replacement therapy then was covering it. So I had this passion for it. And became very knowledgeable, and friends would ask me, who were, this is back in I think the mid noughties, middle 2000s, were asking me, questions because they may have been on TRT for one reason or the other, even though there weren't that many as there are today, and they ended up turning to me for advice or questions about it. I became very knowledgeable about it. So years later, because I'd always worked in the medical sales sector, my background is my degrees in undergrad and my master's of healthcare administration.
Nice.
So, I worked at a hospital. I've worked in medical sales. So when that was no longer an option, and I thought, well, what would I want to do? And I've been talking for years about setting this TRT clinic up. I'm probably way back. I would say around 2011, thinking about how do you set this up. And so finally, when I got off that whole corporate treadmill, I started balancing my hormones. So, but it took a while. It took a while to really get the courage, like any business startup.
Well, yeah.
To just keep cracking at it every day, little by little, whittling away at what you're trying to accomplish. And now it's evolved into such a great company. I've got an amazing team. Two companies and two amazing teams. And it's just fantastic what we've been able to do in the UK in so little time.
What kind of, this is something I'm curious about that I've never really asked anybody at a TRT clinic. What kind of criteria do you have for like the people that work there? Are they like specialized doctors? I mean, what are you looking for, and what different types of people do you hire? Because I'm assuming there's different levels and different areas that people are in.
So in the UK, there's a group called the British Society for Sexual Medicine.
Okay.
So that's a good area to focus. Endocrinology, and I don't mean to be disparaging, well, maybe a little bit, because I've had some endocrinologists in the past that just left me disappointed.
Right.
We tend not to really, they tend not to, it's their own fault. They tend to be dismissive of TRT, and they tend to focus on the more Klinefelter syndromes, the more those kind of conditions. They work on diabetes. So I've often quoted as saying that, we really ought to rename endocrinologists from endocrinologists to mediocre diabetes specialists. So no offense to the good endocrinologists, but the ones, because if they were good endocrinologists, then they would, or good diabetes specialists even, they would see the benefit of testosterone treatment, especially in diabetes. I think maybe that it's changing a little bit. I know there's a national audit going on in the NHS that is considering the role of testosterone, but an audit is really like a mini study, essentially, that they look at to see if there's a benefit of testosterone in some diabetic patients. But it's just very controlled. It's like, my precious, you can't, of who. And for good reason, because whilst you can have a life on TRT, like I have, there can be ups and downs. Not to say that there aren't ups and downs for those who aren't on TRT. I think it can be frustrating because the patient's on a medication and then maybe the morning erections go away for a while. And like, what's going on? I'm on the treatment. Everything's fine. Everything looked perfect on paper. Why have the erections gone away? Well, okay. Well, let's look at what's going on. Maybe you're jet lagged. Maybe you're not getting enough sleep at night. And there are many different factors that can take you there. But what I'm saying is it's not to be taken lightly either. So the criteria, what are the criteria for people coming on TRT? Obviously symptoms. And again, right. we follow their criteria of the ISSAM, and we kind of look at also guidance from the British Society of Sexual Medicine. And what we like about the ISSAM, but also the BSSM, the British guidance, is that it talks about symptoms are really, really important. Okay. But then you also have to look at some biomarkers where historically patients would fall. But the problem with some of the biomarkers and the blood tests are many of the blood tests could vary, even from a similar sample, from sample to sample. You could retest the same sample, you might get so many points difference in the testosterone level. And so if you've got a threshold or a cutoff, and they're just a little bit on one side or the other, and say, oh, you don't need treatment, but yet they've got all the symptoms and all the other metabolic indicators that there's something wrong, then I think that's wrong, because they may be helped, or maybe they need some coaching to see if that can bring it up. But many times when they arrive on the doorstep, if you will, they've already tried those things or think they've tried those things. And I think there's only so much you can do, because those habits will last a while. You've got to find a happy, comfortable middle ground to, because like when someone's trying to lose weight, for instance, or get into shape at the beginning of the year, you're very focused, early January, maybe February, and then starts falling off in March and the rest of the year. You've got to look at the average of what people do. And if they can't maintain that, and even maintaining that might not be good for the testosterone levels, that level of intensity of exercise and maybe going to the gym every single day, that will wear out your testosterone levels as well. So it's not always possible to raise the levels with just that. It helps, you can see the cholesterol levels going down, that sort of thing. But when all else fails, you got to have a serious discussion with yourself, with your partners, and with the doctor to see if this is the right course for you. And there are, obviously, we're going to look at biomarkers, but not just the total testosterone. We're going to look at calculated free testosterone. We're going to look at, like I said, the other metabolic factors, HbA1c, the cholesterol. We'll look at it, see if they have hemochromatosis. Is that the cause of the low testosterone? We'll really dig down if there are vitamin deficiencies. Is that the cause of low testosterone? So the criteria is based on that. And then the guidance talks about, and I think in the UK, it's 15, well, in the ISS, International Society of Aging Males, I think some of the doctors will say deficiencies of testosterone, symptoms of testosterone could start as high as 15 nanomoles per liter. Okay, so 15 nanomoles per liter, I think I should go to my own conversion, I think is just about 450. Could be wrong on the US scale. 400, 450, I think is.
I think that's probably right.
When the early symptoms, and to be fair, 450, 500 was a low cutoff point in the 90s for low T, and obviously that's changed. I mean, how do we get from that to 300?
And sometimes they even go as low as like 270, 280, depending on the area, like LabCorp or Quest. They have different numbers they go to. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's insanely low.
But they'll say they come up with it looking at their patient base. They might make their own determination. But who is making the determination? This is frustrating across the board, because you can look at things like biomarkers like HGH or even thyroid, but more so like the testosterone and growth hormone, IGF-1 levels, is who decides what a healthy level is, right? So I think there were studies done. I think the same guy I mentioned before, Vermeulen, if we pronounce his name right, they did a study in the 90s that looked at diabetic patients, average testosterone levels, free testosterone levels across a age range, and then non-diabetic patients. And obviously non-diabetic patients are going to have a higher level of testosterone, and they're much higher than today's norm. And they could look at, the median or how it's spread across the different population groups. And again, they were higher. And now the other consideration is, how does one titrate levels? What do you titrate them towards? A younger person's, because in the realm of the anti-aging or age restoration, is you don't want to be a 50-year-old with 50-year-old levels. You want to be a 50-year-old with 25 or 30-year-old levels.
Right.
You keep dropping down. So there's no point in replacing naturally low testosterone levels with artificially low testosterone levels, because I mean, you may as well just keep your own, with the exception that perhaps and this is very important, when patients will get their blood results, especially after treatment, and especially with some of the topicals, the creams. It's really hard because you're trying to pinpoint a particular number, and people will be happy or sad by the number. We all do it. I've done it before. Right? If you get a number back and you're disappointed what it is. But we forget that we can take things out of context. So what I mean is the testosterone cream, scrotal cream, or even the gels, you apply them, and then people would say, well, I've got lower levels than when I started because I started on the gels. because we measured them, or they got measured too late, or they went in and didn't do, I think for the gels, the guidelines are within 5 to 6 hours after application. Now, there's no rhyme or reason why. I think it's just to satisfy the patient that, okay, it's getting into your system. But what we traditionally do with injections is you want to look at the trough, the lowest level.
Right.
So, am I going to be too low before the next injection? But what can sometimes happen is those numbers might look lower than someone was anticipating or would like. But it doesn't mean it was low on the peak, because we know injections and even the creams, they spike and they fall back down. And if it's the creams, that's going to happen in a shorter window. So you have to, essentially, if you look at a graph, you have to measure what's called the area under the curve, and you have to compare the two. I think that's some form of calculus. You compare these areas to know what you have. But people don't see it that way. They just see that one number, say, I'm low, this must not be working.
Right.
So ideally, there'd be something you can put on your arm that would measure you hourly. And then you can see a graph out on your phone, right? Or you see all the different hormones. But I don't think we're there yet. So the other way to do it is you can do to satisfy that patient. You can get a mid peak, because if you get a peak, then they'll say, well, you're overdosing me because my levels are too high. But then that would be the level to expect them. And sometimes I've heard this from other clinicians who will look at a level and it shows outside of the range, and they don't understand the context. Well, that test, because let's say you need to do a thyroid test and you couldn't wait until your trough level, you end up getting a peak or mid peak, and it's outside of the normal range, and they say you're on too much medication. But hang on a minute, I was only doing a fraction of what the guidance talks about doing a full 250 milligrams of a testosterone ester every 3 weeks, okay? Or maybe 2 weeks if for some trans men get it every 2 weeks. That's literally written on the package leaflet for some of the medications. So trans men get to take it every 2 weeks, and everyone else every 3 weeks. That's if you were to follow the package leaflet or the NHS protocol. So if you were to take that 250 milligrams and do a measurement the day after or 2 days after, you would have a massive spike. It would probably be 2,000 nanograms per day. But that's the traditional way of doing it. And then if you measured it 3 weeks later, then you'd be you'd be hypogonadal again, back to where you started.
Right.
So that's where the area under the curve makes a difference. But it's not fair to leave a man hypogonadal for 2 weeks, because some of the esters will only last about a week reasonably.
Yeah, exactly.
So it makes no sense. So to have a doctor, question another doctor to say, oh, why is this patient's levels are too high? Or even a patient to question you, say my levels are too high. It's only, you have to put it in context, and it's only based on the time in which you took it. So if you realize the time that you took it, that yes, that was my peak, then you label it as a peak. If that's my trough, it's your trough. It doesn't mean, so even if your trough comes down to where you started, it doesn't mean you were that way in the beginning of that dose. And that's something a lot of patients need to get their head around, because they'll say, my levels are this. Well, those levels are dynamic. They're not static.
Exactly.
So your level was this at this point in time. And I think a lot of people have a hard time getting their head around that.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a factor that I don't hear anybody talk about that. Literally, I've never heard anybody bring that up or talk about that. And that's such a good and valid point. And that's why a place like yours is such a big deal, that you have that kind of information. Now, let me ask you this. I have two questions for you, but let's start with this one. For you, and like we said earlier, the question of, well, how much should I take for TRT? Well, I don't know. What do you find? Because I'm sure it's just like when I do a video and I'm talking about steroid cycles, for example, and I say, hey, this is a standard dose, but that doesn't mean that's the dose for you. Yeah. What do you tend to run into that you find to be more of a typical dosage? Because what I tell people is, and I want to know if you agree with this, but this is what I've always found formula wise. And generally speaking, your testosterone level will reflect about 5 to 7 times what you're dosing. So if you're dosing 100 milligrams of testosterone per week, I would expect you to be in the 500 to 700 range, closer to 700, unless you're not metabolizing well and you have a severe case of hypogonadism. Do you find that formula to be accurate? And what do you tend to see? If you had to say what your average TRT dose is it like 125? Is it 150? What do you find your average to be amongst all of your clients?
I think you got to look at different factors. For some patients, if they have a low SHBG level, they're going to excrete out a lot. So giving them a massive amount in one go is not going to be appropriate for that patient.
Right.
And it's funny because what people do, I'll see them write on it. We've got a forum as well, a Facebook group. And what people write on the Facebook group is like, I'm doing 100 milligrams a week, but I'm doing, 25 milligrams, or 20, so much per day. Or so wait, I got that wrong. Let's say I'm doing 100 milligrams, 125 milligrams a week, but I'm injecting 3 times a week, or I'm injecting 4 times a week. Well, how much are you injecting? Oh, I split it up. Okay. But then, so my point is, you're doing what you're doing. If you're injecting that, then you're doing that dose so many days a week, right? You're not doing the 100 milligram dose. So if let's say you're on a 4-day split, I'm doing 100 milligrams every 4 days. You're doing 100 milligrams every 4 days. If I'm doing 50 milligrams twice a week, you're doing 50 milligrams twice a week. But if they say that 50 milligrams twice a week, they might say on the forum or the Facebook group that I'm doing 100 milligrams a week.
Right.
So it's not helpful if people don't break down. I want to know the dose that you're doing. It doesn't matter how much you're getting in a week. What matters is what you are on the trough level. That's my point. Because so you go up, it's going to go down, and when it clears, you're going to do an injection again. So it really doesn't matter what you've done in total for the week. What matters is each injection period is what matters,
right?
And where you fall in the trough, because you're not going to do an injection, then another injection, then measure it at the end of the week.
No.
And I think a lot of people fall into that trap as well, not understanding. Because I think maybe from the bodybuilding community, you get so ingrained in what are you doing, per week, and
right.
I think it's kind of pointless. But you asked, what is our average dose, or what kind of doses do we do? And I'm saying it's bespoke TRT. We've got a dose for every different person, and at the pharmacy we've got, we have access to many different types of testosterone. We've got testosterone propionate that comes, 25 milligrams per 1 mil.
Right.
We have the testosterone enanthate. And in the UK and in Europe, most of them come in, or all of them really, except for one, come inside ampules, glass breakable ampules. You have to break them open, which seems so archaic, but that's made. Because they're made to be single use, which starts me off on a whole nother tangent where, some patients see it as liquid gold, and our instructions from the doctor, and I know people are going to hate this, is, use the dose that you're prescribed and discard the rest. Because if you open this glass ampule, there's no rubber bung on it. It's open to the air. Yes, there's a preservative in it, but we can't guarantee the sterility once you've opened it. So if you're doing things and decanting it into something else, there's one thing for the compounding pharmacy to do that, because they've got, a whole, sterile laminar flow setup. It's all ISO rated. But it's another thing for a patient to do that on the kitchen table, is to start decanting something into a vial from the ampule. So that's always been really difficult. But we try to follow and take the high road when it comes to that. But because we have so many different options of testosterone, so I keep getting off on tangents, it can start all over the board. Now, we've done an audit on the various types of testosterone treatments. And I think one of the most common, one that seems to work as a starting point, and it's only as a starting point, is you don't want to give someone too much, too little. If they've got an average SHBG, many will, 100 or 125 milligrams of a medium-acting testosterone ester, every 5 to 7 days, depending on the patient, depending on the preference, depending on the cost that the patient, there's a whole combination of things, because, we've seen it really work well for those patients on those doses. But if they have a low SHBG, the doctor will look at creams. They'll look at maybe the testosterone propionate. They'll look at testosterone cypionate, 50 milligrams twice a week or every 3 days. So there are so many different options. And I think that's where the coaches come in, and they help listen to what the patient's going to work, because you have to work out, okay, what's going to work for a patient's quality of life. Does that patient want to inject that frequently? And we've had some that buck the trend, because it's not always the hard and fast rule that, if my SHBG is low, I can only do daily injections. No, we've got some patients that say, look, I don't care. I hate needles. I hate injecting, but I don't want creams either, or gels. So I just want to do it once a week and forget it. And so do it once a week. I mean, years ago, that's all most people ever got. And that was considered microdosing.
Right.
And other people can't feel quite right on weekly dosing. So they may need something more frequent, but smaller. So yeah, I don't have a one hard and fast answer.
Sure.
Traditionally, about 125 milligrams every 5 to 7 days, or 100 milligrams every 5 to 7 days of a testosterone ester was okay. But we've moved so far beyond that to having all these different options. It's been really, really good. And we also have the option in the UK. We end up importing the multi-dose vial testosterone cypionate, which allows for smaller, more frequent dosing in a safer way compared to, I think there's some other clinics. You talk about some of the US clinics. There's some UK copycat clinics that either don't understand or not too concerned.
Right.
That they'll, have the patients just, they'll give them the ampules, tell them to break it and decant it into something.
Shit.
And, because those aren't really licensed for patients to use normally on their own. They're usually meant for healthcare professional for like a vaccine dose or something like this.
Right.
And so we've always taken the high ground, and we even got confirmation from the Royal Pharmaceutical Council that the right way to do it for the ampules is one ampule, one dose. So
right. Yeah. I mean,
that's the right thing to do.
That's typically the right way to do it, but you know how it is, like you were talking about. Yeah. Let me ask you this. Because, one way to lower SHBG is by using Proviron, but that's obviously not ideal for everybody and not just going to be what anybody can do or get prescribed. What do you recommend, or what do you do for your patients that have high SHBG? What is your protocol, or how do you attack that?
So I've seen some of the doctors through the clinic. They consider SHBG because there are a couple. They were considering SHBG. There were some options. We have Proviron available.
Right.
I think it does a minimal job in lowering the SHBG, but there's other reasons for the elevated SHBG. I think was it non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? It might lead you to higher sex hormone binding globulin. So you've got to really fix the source of the problem. You've got to try to fix the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I think they've renamed it something else now. So that's one part. And the other part is that they might just need more testosterone. I mean, many times adding more testosterone in with a higher SHBG really doesn't seem to have a negative effect on the hematocrit and hemoglobin.
Right.
Because many times on the hematocrit and hemoglobin side, it's usually the trough level of free testosterone that is a predictor of elevated hemoglobin and hematocrit and red blood cells.
Right.
So there may need to be a longer duration between when the injection is done and when the next one's done. So even if they go a little bit lower, as long as you get that low trough level, they may not have the issue with elevated red blood cells. And I've seen this in studies. I'm not making this up. I'm quoting. I can't remember the study that, and you just look it up on PubMed. That's a predictor. So a lot of people who've come to us that had microdose 10 milligrams of testosterone cypionate, or 15 milligrams daily, or maybe thrown in some HCG. I've seen this, and they said, and they still had, elevated hematocrit and hemoglobin. Sometimes can get away with, 25 milligrams every other day of testosterone propionate.
Right.
And the levels come right down to normal. Provided that there's no other issue like hemochromatosis, or they're not in high altitudes, or not smokers. So.
What do you, because I've always been an advocate of, like, if you're doing cypionate, the twice a week dosing, because I've always felt like there's more blood stability. You feel better doing that. I know some people, like you said earlier, do like to just pin once a week. I hate to pin myself, but I still do it twice a week because I feel different. I feel better. I feel like towards the end of the week, I don't feel nearly as good. What is your thought on that? What is your feeling on that? What do you generally recommend?
So, like I said, we have to look at patient's preference.
Right.
We can guide them so far, but if you want the patient to be compliant with the treatment. So,
of course,
we look at where the SHBG is as just a general rule. We look at what, like I said, because we have the ampules. What does what's going to be realistic for the patient to be compliant, and will they want to? Because the more frequently they are, with the exception if there's a multi-dose vial, then meaning more frequent the injections are, they're going to go through it faster.
Right.
Potentially. Well, if it's a smaller dose, it'll be about the same time. So it just depends. I can't say, hey, there's a one size fits all for these guys. It just really depends.
Okay. All right. What about you personally? Like, what do you're
I've tried many different doses from, originally it was like once every 2 weeks of testosterone enanthate.
Yeah.
And it was, I think eventually weekly with 200 milligrams of testosterone cypionate. Then it became 100 to 125 milligrams sustanon.
Got it.
Brand name sustanon, not the dodgy underground thing. There's like one sustanon, and that's I think made by Aspen.
Yeah,
and that's it. And everything else is a weak imitation, with the exception of Omnidron, which is
I was just going to say Omnidron. Yeah,
in Europe. And the nice thing about it used to be nice. It's a shame Omnidron matched their formulation to sustanon.
Yeah,
so that makes it more. That doesn't give us a valid reason for import of Omnidron because there's no reason to. It's the same thing, just labeled differently. But there used to be a slightly different ester compared to what the sustanon formulation was.
Yeah, because I've seen it that way, and I'm like, okay. Yeah. It's like the grocery stores here that are the same, but if you go to a different state, it's a different name. It's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. Or like the two different Aldi brands. There's a German.
Yeah.
They're both from Germany, but there's sometimes you see them in the US one way, and in the UK you'll see them in the other.
Yeah, it's just
slightly different logo.
I don't get it.
I think they literally are just different. People own different licenses to those different formulations.
Probably.
And they got the approvals of the regulatory agencies, and so that's kind of how it works. But what I do now is 50 milligrams every third day.
All right, cool.
And that keeps my trough level around 25 to 28 nanomoles per liter. Which is probably around 800.
That's
right.
And that's where I like to be in like the 650 to 750 range. I'm generally right around 700, and I do like 125 milligrams of cypionate a week, and that works well for me. But like we said, everybody's got to figure out their own. So here's one that I struggle with this because I am not a fan of HCG at all. I know some people are, and I always tell people, look, it has a small place, I guess, in a steroid cycle. For me, it's like on a fertility protocol, it's part of it. It's not the main part of it, but it's part of it. Here, it's like when they write you a script at a lot of the clinics, not with the doctor necessarily, but a lot of these clinics, here's what they're doing. Here's your testosterone, here's your HCG, and here's your Arimidex. Yeah. Most people don't need Arimidex on TRT. Some do, but most don't. Most people have no need for HCG whatsoever. What's your opinion on it? What is you guys' protocol or how do you tackle that?
So when someone is concerned about their fertility, obviously HCG has a place.
Right.
It sits in this weird area. I mean, we have HCG available. I think there was a problem in the US getting HCG in the past. And so I think it's good to have those things on offer. Now, I know there were some studies about fertility that I think were Baylor University. What was the doctor's name? I can't remember. They made reference to if you want to maintain fertility and stay on TRT, then you add in testosterone, HCG, and anastrozole. And some of the studies will show, I know that the anastrozole helps preserve the fertility. That's why it's used. And fertility clinics will give it.
Right.
With all the concern and it's almost a politicization of the anastrozole, because what that's something that I just saw from one of our doctors. He sent me an email. It's something it's not a go-to for us at all. But there are some. It's up to the doctor. There's some patients that may find a benefit from it. And in fact, I've come across a couple of different studies about, and this is going to sound really controversial in the light of this, because I'm not on an AI. I've been on an AI in the past.
Yeah.
But there are some men that may experience erectile dysfunction despite being on testosterone replacement therapy. We've heard of this before, right? You're on testosterone replacement therapy. Everything's on point. Estradiol might be a little bit high, but you say, no, can't do an AI. No, can't do it because, it's become very politicized. And by right, you shouldn't. I mean, in the early days of TRT, there was no AI involved at all. But back then, in the early days, you would mock the doctors the Kaiser Permanente doctors in the US who weren't writing an AI to go along with your testosterone treatment. And even one of the endocrinologists that saw me, I think back in the 90s, had written me a aromatase inhibitor, but wrongly at a really high dose. And I'll tell you why, because you shake your head. There are studies that show why does erectile dysfunction happen. So one, it might create collagen in the penis and create venous leakage, even in the presence of testosterone.
Right.
And two, it can increase prolactin in some people when the estrogen gets so high.
Sure.
In some people. So for that small segment, I've seen some of the studies where they've given an AI a small amount or a various different amounts. Sometimes they give too much in the studies. They give way too much. They do seem to solve that problem. I don't know what lots of people say, well, the long term is you're going to have cardiovascular issues, etc. I don't think there's enough studies. I'd like to see them that would show that. But I think common sense, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to have to be on more medication, full stop.
True.
And that's been the point. But then if you've got a problem and it fixes it, then you think, well, maybe for that particular patient, not crushing the estrogen, maybe slightly getting it into balance might be an option for that patient. If you try everything else, because I don't know what's worse. Do an ergot dopamine agonist, like cabergoline, where you're not sure if that's going to give you valve problems down the road, which it wouldn't, it shouldn't.
Right.
There's no evidence that it would, but there are little blips in the literature.
Sure.
Or aromatase inhibitor. And the problem with the aromatase inhibitors are some of the literature are all based on women who are completely suppressing their estrogen, which is really bad because you need estrogen. And one of the reasons why I don't use the aromatase inhibitor is because, many reasons, but one of them, it can lower my HDL. It can lower your growth hormone level. It hurts my joints. I've got osteoarthritis in both joints, and it feels better when I've not used the AI.
Dries you out, yeah.
But there have been times when I had used the AI, and if I was having issues where the morning erections weren't coming on, and a little bit of the AI, you know what? It fixed that.
Yeah.
It fixed it, and it went away. And I think there was a time I wrote it down, just even a few years ago. I looked in my diary, in my calendar, when I did do an AI. It was 1/4 of a milligram. Maybe not even once a week. It would be maybe once a fortnight. It's when the symptoms were coming on, a little bit of that just kept it quiet.
Sure.
Brought it down a bit. A little bit of a change kept it, feeling a bit better. So it's a tough one, that. And I hate this topic because it's become so politicized in the TRT community.
Right.
And you often wonder, has it been politicized so that certain doctors or clinics could stake out their claim and say, look, we're different. Or certain people on YouTube say, we're different. We're not doing it like those people. We've got this whole new way. And so I think both sides have valid points. And I did a video with Dr. Anne McLean, some other things, because in the perfect world, and this is what my point was. So we've had patients and the opposite effect. They had low estrogen, despite being on a high dose of testosterone. They couldn't get the estrogen up high enough. So how do you explain that? So the point is bespoke, personalized care. You have to offer something based on that individual. There are some people that don't need an AI at all and probably should never have an AI. Sure. They don't need it. The levels are fine. The sex drive is fine. The erections are fine. They don't get a rise in prolactin. There are other people who might be obese.
That's a good point.
That may in the early days need it. There are some men who might be on finasteride. So they're already doing one blocking the DHT, which you shouldn't do. And if you sometimes don't give them an AI, I see later in the notes, they complain that they got swollen nipples and this, because you've forced it down one pathway.
Right.
So that's where some of the balance, and so if they're already using one poison, you hate to add another, but if you don't, and it's not really poison. I mean, Dr. John Crisley used to say, the dose makes the poison.
Right.
And if you do go overboard with it, you're going to get the bad joints. You may get the bone loss. You probably will get lots of bone loss over time. And I think the goal is to kind of wean people off with the right protocol. But you know what? Everyone is different, and it's not for us to judge or decide what is right. We love the cases when there is no AI needed. It's better. And I know the cynics out there will say, "Oh, well, TRT clinics, they just want to sell more AI." No, we don't. It's cheap as chips. We don't charge a lot for the AI. I was going to say
it's super cheap.
But sometimes I think it's doctor's discretion, and if there is a place for it, it should be minimal. And I gotta say one other thing. There are some of the gurus out there, some of the doctors who I've even had on my channel that would talk about all the negatives of AI. And we always ask, is it the anastrozole or the exemestane, or is it the medication itself? Or is it how far you've gone to lowering that estradiol over time? And I think they can never really pick it apart. But I've had those doctors say, I never use an AI, off camera say, well, there are cases when I have had to use an AI in the beginning for the shortest time possible. So those who think they are, so solid and not veering off to the dark side of the AI world, as it's now been painted in certain online places, that I just think there's got to be a balance, and it's got to be individualized for the patient. And the ideal is not having to have it at all. If you're one of those people that are fortunate enough, but I think I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with other people. There might be a period of time where it might be needed. Now, alternatives could be you go longer without having your next dose of testosterone, right? If that should be the last resort. But I think to say completely no in all circumstances, I mean, it's almost sounding like the abortion movement, right? That's in the US, right? So,
yes.
It doesn't matter the life of the mother, just, no. And I think that's, hope I didn't say anything too controversial, but it's just one of those areas where a little bit of flexibility, and it should be little and not very often that you would need it.
I agree. And, I've taken a ton of shit over the years because I am a proponent of controlling estrogen on steroid cycles. And there's so many people, it's going to kill your gains, it's going to crush this. Well, no, not if you use it properly. The thing is understanding your body, understanding how estrogen prone you may or may not be. I can't if I use anything over 200 milligrams of testosterone, my estrogen level immediately goes over 50 into the 60. Like, it's way too high.
You don't feel good at all.
No. And I am one of those guys that I know when I see water retention, I flip out.
Or
I'm like
puffy, or
yes,
and that's a big Go on, sorry.
Well, you just don't feel right, and it. Some people don't understand when you get high estrogen, it can cause you to be depressed.
Yes,
and you don't even realize it.
In a different way, I think high estradiol could act on the serotonin receptor. So normally, serotonin make you calm, but too much. If you ever had serotonin that gets too high, people on SSRIs, they can't get erections. Or it's a lot harder. So if it's just a matter of doing a small amount of AI in those patients or in people, then that's a different story. I think what happens is there's a conflation that happens in the TRT world. That there are some people on a very, very small dose, and they probably don't need an AI. And there's some guys that need a slightly larger dose, but then also convert a lot, and the ratio is off, because obviously the more testosterone you have in most people is going to make more estradiol, but it's not always the case, because I've seen it even in myself. When my levels were reaching the trough, I'd still have quite a bit of 40, 50 picograms of estradiol there.
Yeah.
So, and you don't feel good when it's like that. So how low do you lower the dose and still have an effective testosterone replacement therapy? If you keep lowering it, you still have high estradiol, and now you've changed that ratio in the wrong way.
Absolutely right. And it's one of those things that's very touchy, and it's sensitive to everybody, because I swear to you, in the bodybuilding community, it is immediately thought of, if you use an aromatase inhibitor, you're going to crush your gains. And there's a fine line there. Yeah. And it's just like, women need small amounts of testosterone. Men need estrogen. And if you crush it, you're going to have problems. And if you go too high, you're going to have problems. So there's that fine line there. I just don't like when it's automatically given. Like, I love the point you brought up about being obese, because then one of the things that I run into with guys, that they get angry with me when I say you shouldn't use steroids at a high body fat. But one of the main reasons you shouldn't is because you have a higher rate of estrogen conversion. And if you're on TRT, you're going to have a higher rate of estrogen conversion. So I totally understand the concept of an AI there. It makes total sense.
I mean, back in 2016, when we first started, and before any of this controversy around this topic had come up, and I think it's dying down, it's becoming more moderate, but it was, you would, and I noticed this in myself when I was younger, you would start on TRT, everything is fine. And then, like I said, 6 months later, what's changed? Okay, estradiol creeps up a bit. People don't feel good. Their bodies are supposed to have changed, but there may be some, negative effects of this. And, when people have been prescribed a small dose of it, tiny dose, if absolutely needed, and we can't change anything else, you do see a change, and people are happy, and they're not, the libido is good. The morning erections are hard. So,
right.
I think you leave it up to the doctors. We're always trying to give the latest data to the doctors. We're always trying to, and I do this a lot, to find out and say, hey, the less we can use it, the better. But, we can't be so absolutist in our view of this, and as some people are, because just like I said, the opposite is, do we start giving estrogen to men? They can't make any more estrogen because they have a genetic condition where they don't make enough estradiol. And like I said, we've had men that literally wanted estrogen added to their TRT because they weren't making enough. So of the estrogen, because estrogen is beneficial. But massive amounts out of the ratio probably aren't so good for you. And for the prostate as well, BPH, it may help aggravate BPH in patients.
Let me ask you this. Why, I think I know the answer to this, but I want your answer to it. Why is it that it's always anastrozole that's prescribed and not aromacin? Why is that?
Aromacin is amazing on paper.
Yeah.
It's a steroid-based molecule. It's a suicidal inhibitor, knocks the thing out. But it's bloody hard to titrate. And so you don't know how long it's going to be having its effect in the system. There's the half-life bit of it.
Sure.
There's the other part of how it's action, basically. So, okay, the half-life of the medications are half the time to remove half of that medication. Right. But there's still actions that happen after. So just because the medication's out, you still have now wiped out your aromatase enzyme. With anastrozole, you got this binding to the aromatase enzyme. But it seems in practice it's just easier to control. It's because I've tried both. Exemestane was so hard. Whether you split the capsules or have them, or the tablets, or have them compounded, it's you just can't seem to get it right. Where the anastrozole, I think, is just the easiest to manage and control. I mean, you can get away with, I think, a half-life every 3 days or so.
Right.
Well, less you can do, like I've done in the past, every 20 days, 14 days, and just a little bit to get things down. And then you get that nice estrogen that comes back up. And it seems like the rising of estrogen, the rising of TRT, that seems to drive libido in a lot of people. It's not the static. Everyone talks about stable levels. And I think you can have stable testosterone levels, but then your E2 starts climbing. And that's what probably, throws a spanner into things so people think stable. I want to feel good all the time. I think that's what people refer to as stable. But sometimes you don't realize how good you feel till you start feeling not so good. So you've got the compare and contrast effect.
Totally.
But there's so many people keep repeating, I want stable levels, but your own body doesn't make stable levels. It's higher in the morning and lower in the evening. And
exactly.
And you try to match that with creams, but are you really matching it with creams? Because most creams, you do them twice a day.
Right.
And so you'll get the spike in the morning and throughout the day when you take your first dose of cream, and then your second dose, you get another spike 12 hours later, probably before bed. And then it might dissipate towards the morning, depending on what time you've gone to bed. So normally your testosterone will be the highest first thing in the morning. And it might be towards the trough at that point. So it's not quite diurnal. I suppose you can do it once a day, but even if you did it once a day, you're going to be low by the time the morning comes around anyway. So
I know.
How is that matching your diurnal rhythm anymore? And is there any clinical evidence that matching the diurnal rhythm is going to make a difference? But I suppose the change in the short-acting nature of creams or testosterone propionate or some other, medium-acting testosterones, that may cause enough of a change. So, okay, so what you dip down into, the 400 or 500 range for an hour a day. So what? Because you're going to be right back on it. Now, if you're always stuck at the low level, 300, 250, 500, all the time, well, obviously you're not going to feel good. And that goes back to that whole area under the curve. So if you measure someone at the total amount of testosterone they got during an injection compared if they were always kind of mediocre, the one with the injection, even though their trough level is going to be low for them, they're going to have more testosterone overall given.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So here's another question that I had for you. when it comes to diet, because diet can play a part in all of this as well. I know it's not the majority of it, but it certainly can. And you can eat bad foods, and eating bad is certainly not going to help how you feel. Do you do any type of focus there at the clinic on that? Do you do any diet advisement or talk to people about that at all? And if so, what do you tell people to avoid?
Oh, that's a good question. So, at the clinic, some of the team will talk about their own experiences with, I know that we're not as fixated on this special diet or the other special diet. And we've had on the channel, one of my friends, Al Reeves, he's a coach for the keto diet, but we don't go out and say, oh, everyone should do the keto diet. And
right.
We don't even mention it. I think we listen to what the patients say. Many of the patients come to us already with a certain dietary pattern set up. And I know that our case managers and our doctors have talked about, well, how, just eat a balanced, healthy diet or a Mediterranean diet is something that, I've heard the doctors focus on. But we're not out there only to give nutrition advice because I think that's a specialty role, and my guys are there to help support them and point them in the right direction to get that nutrition advice. And it's something that when it comes to nutrition, as far as vitamins and what they're missing and deficient, that becomes apparent in the blood tests. And I know we have some other coaches that were looking to collaborate with us to look at how we have a more holistic approach. And so we can refer off to some of these coaches, but it just depends what the patient wants to pay for, as far as, if they want that extra level of service for that kind of advice. But generally speaking, yes, the doctor's going to say, oh, you're eating that all the time. Probably not the best based on your blood levels to be on that. So there is that coaching that's going on. It's just not more of a formalized coaching plan. It happens within the realm of the consultation, or within the realm of the but there's only so much time that you can give, and you want to give as much as you can to solve the problem for the patient. And I think in the conversations I've had with patients, as when I was doing the coaching, that was something that we talked about, is how do we, what we ask them, what's your diet? And on the intake form, we ask them, do you drink too much alcohol? What's your diet like? Do you do lots of sweets? Do you do lots of, trans fatty acids? So all these things, we try to document and gather. And if do you smoke? We try to change that habit as much as we can. So it is a holistic approach from that point of view. Absolutely.
Yeah. Diet's a big deal, man. And it's, I asked that. I know how difficult it is to coach diet. I've been a certified nutritionist for almost 10 years, and it's a lot of work if you customize it to people. So I get that. I just wondered if you guys touched on it, which I see that you do a little bit, and it's good that you do, because I don't think people take that into account either. I mean, we could literally probably touch on 1,000 different things that affect all of this, I'm sure. So that's cool that you do that too. I mean, it's just so well-rounded what you do. I want to shift now to the Mr. Olympia, because that was awesome. I mean, that was for me. Okay. So I started doing YouTube videos. I was one of the first kind of people that started talking about steroids. And I mean, I've been doing it since like 2012. It's when I started doing it, and it just was not commonplace to talk about it, and to talk about hormones and things in public, like that was going on at the Mr. Olympia. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it was so different to be around it. And it was a big ass deal to me to see it. And I want to know how because you sponsored that for Dr. Michael, and I did a podcast with Dr. Michael Palmieri, and what got you in to do that? Like, how did you even get involved in that? And is that something that we're going to continue to see and you're going to continue to do?
Yeah, I've offered to help sponsor for next year. But I met Michael back in 2020, I think, right around the time at the Arnold Classic in Columbus. Yeah. And that was one of the first I'd gone to. Was it 2020 or was it the year before? I can't remember. What are those dates?
He was doing the Arnold before the Mr. Olympia. Yeah.
And then Arnold has gone quiet, and we had an Arnold, or have an Arnold here in the UK. We're not attending this year. We attended last year in 2022. and they didn't have it for 2023, so they're going to be back in March for the Arnold. But they weren't very supportive in the UK of Arnold, and they're not in the US as well. I think they've got new organizers about the educational part of it. I think it's really important that a lot of young people, or the bodybuilders in this, which gets a bad name, or those guys that like to be into fitness, and there's the pressure from social media and the Instagram, and you're looking good, and it's all over the place.
Oh shit, I know.
People really enjoy that, right? That this is part of life. But there's more than just the looks. There's the health component of it, and there's the education about what are you doing and what these certain components do. And it's not just at like Mr. Olympia. There are other groups, A4M, and these other big age management types of groups that look at and those are geared towards doctors for education. So all these events try to do, and the Mr. Olympia educational series is trying to do, is educate and inform people who otherwise wouldn't be informed, and help them to make safe, informed decisions about what's out there, what's good for your health. And there's so many different topics, from better ways to exercise when you get older that might recruit different muscle fibers. There were talks on general TRT and hormone replacement in Las Vegas in 2022. I gave a talk on the stigma around testosterone treatment and what it's like for our patients, and I experienced that myself in the past, directly from doctors and their attitudes towards testosterone. Some telling me you need a very small amount of testosterone. Any more is, for jumping off of trees. I'm just like, whatever, mate. You have no idea. So I think, the Mr. Olympia set up to diminish the taboo around hormones. And it wasn't just hormones. There were other life extension options. They talked about peptides. They talked about, different exercise routines, and I think it was really good. And nutrition, there's a whole, I think someone talked about nutrition there. And actually on our channel, the Balance for Hormones channel, along with Dominate Your Game, we will be posting videos of the actual talks that occurred there. So people can go to the channel and watch those come out. I think the first one is like Dr. George Tiliatos. Yes. He actually made the introduction to Michael. He's got me involved with it, and his talk was interesting about getting an abscess from injections and how to manage that care and how to deal with it. I thought it was a really good presentation from George, and a bit different to the traditional ones that he's done. So because that's useful information that people might not be aware of. It's a shame in some ways, because there are a lot of people that may abuse. I hate to use the word abuse, but they'll take these and think it's just really easy. You just take these medications and I'll get to where I want to go. And in the bodybuilding world, and
it's not how it works.
I think it can lead people down the wrong path, or they'll see the pro and they look massive, and then they think they have to take thousands and thousands of milligrams to look the same way, and they end up having all these negative side effects as a result. And I think if people are more informed about it and they come to the Mr. Olympia, they're going to learn about different uses of hormones, the TRT bit, anti-aging, healthy lifestyle. This is all part of, I think, what Michael's trying to do. And I'm there. I want to support and be part of it as well. And as we do here in the UK, this is why I support it. Yes, I'm a UK Europe clinic and service and platform and pharmacy, but I feel it's important to have this more international reach with everyone, and say that we support this sort of thing.
Yes, 100%. That's funny because you brought up Dr. George. He is so intelligent. He's so straight to the point, because some of the people there were extremely long-winded. Well, just leave that alone. But he is like to the point, very smart. But what I loved about the whole setup was it's like, okay, you've got actual doctors. You got people like me that are like influencers or people that know what we're talking about, but have a different aspect of it. And then somebody like you who's kind of in between, where you're like a doctor.
I was in between. I was in the middle.
Exactly. Right.
I was in the middle of the round table and trying to host it and moderate the group.
You did a tremendous job. I swear it was like, and my wife said immediately, like, you need to, because I honestly, Mike, we were getting, and it was going on, and I had other things I needed to do. And I told her, I said, we're probably going to have to get up and go. And then I heard you say like, okay, one or two more questions. And thank God that I stayed there to meet all of you guys and talk to you, because it was like, It was all, I don't throw this around. It was like life altering to me to meet all of you and to be able to have these conversations and to like, I don't care how much you know, or you think you know, or how long you've been doing something. You never can know too much, but you can always know too little. And I gained so much, even from the conversation I had with you, even just listening at the Mr. Olympia. But our last conversation, you taught me about different kinds of medicines. I'm seeing different kinds of things that you do with the TRT. And when we have this together and maybe agree, disagree, whatever, we learn so much from each other. And it's so nice to have these conversations and get away from politics and all this shit where people can argue, and to get different aspects, come together, teach people. This is what it's all about. This is how life is supposed to be, not petty, like learn from each other, gain from each other. So what I'm telling you is I value this tremendously. And this is coming from a guy that so I'm 41 years old now. And when I was doing this, especially like, 7-8 years ago, I was very territorial, very like, oh, fuck this person. Like I don't want challenged. I need people like you that I can talk with and learn from and converse with and come up with new things, hear about new studies. This right here to me is what it's all about. And like what you did at Mr. Olympia, that's what it's all about. It's learning and understanding everybody's different and listening and gaining from it. So what I'm saying is thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, no, thank you for watching and being in the audience. And hopefully next year we've got an even larger crowd, and we can get the live streaming up as well. We live stream for a little bit, but it's a tricky one with a live stream because you're in the big hall and you don't have the high speed Wi-Fi to do it. But no, I like the collaboration. I've always wanted to make friends in the industry and with outside the industry. And it's also about harm reduction, especially from the area where you come from. A lot of people are so not even clueless about what to do, and they need to be educated and probably steered away from hurting themselves to how can you protect your health, which is so important, even from a young age. And when you're young, you're resilient, but as you get older, you can have some serious problems. I spoke to someone the other night that told me they did a cycle, that animal steroid that they use in cattle, and then had some things that may have been related to some bad effects on their heart down the road. And you never know for sure, but you just think, God, this guy didn't even know what he was doing. He didn't test his blood levels. He didn't know he was on testosterone. Maybe he was deficient in testosterone because he's a middle-aged man, right? He's in his early 40s. So maybe he was deficient in testosterone. But he said, I just took whatever they gave me at the gym. Like, but you're 40 years old, mate. You also know.
I know.
You're taking such a risk, and you think this injection is going to, be your fountain of youth. It's going to make you an Adonis, or it's going to make you Mr. Muscle, and it doesn't work that way. Especially if you didn't go through a proper doctor, through the proper channels. And at the end, and like I said, at the end of the day, he may have actually been deficient. And I think so many, not everyone, but many young men even that seek out, the dark side of this, will probably have some form of deficiency anyway. Right. Because if they were hitting the targets that they thought they should hit, generally speaking, right, then they would probably be happy with the body shape. I mean, obviously there's a body dysmorphism that goes into it, but if you're successful and you're putting on the muscle and you're lean, generally speaking, you probably won't seek out the hormones if you don't need them.
And so this is how I've kind of evolved as like my belief system and what I do. I do a lot of educational videos and talk about how to use things, the side effects, the facts behind them. But as I've gotten older, experienced more, and been tasked with seeing all of these questions, coaching all these people, and the way that my values personally have changed, I try, because I take a lot of shit for this, but the first thing I say is you shouldn't use anything. I understand you're gonna, and I want you to at least learn how to do it. But the ideal here is to not use anything. Yeah. And this more is always better concept. And, the pros do this, but the pros don't tell you all of the problems they have and what happens later. And the young guys that don't understand my blood work looks good now, or so-and-so did this, but you don't understand what 5 years down the road, and then 10 years, and then 15 years. Well, I don't care if I have kids. Well, you might not care if you have kids now, but when you meet somebody and then this happens and your mind changes, then what? And I fall into that, honestly. I mean, I had zero fertility. And at this point, me and my wife are too old and we're perfectly fine, but that could have been something that could have been a problem. You know what I mean? And we luckily, and thank God for our relationship, but that's not the same relationship. Sometimes your wife or partner could just leave you over something like that. And your whole life could be devastated. There's just so many factors people don't understand. And then you don't understand, you will need TRT for life. And then you will need to go see Mike or you know what I mean? And you don't know what goes into that. You just don't know.
I leave you on the point, and I've said it in one of my videos. It's so true. So some of the people that I've noticed, there's a whole mindset. I don't want to say everyone's like this, but a lot of people have come from, the steroid abuse world. They think anything. So they'll either become. It's almost like when you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? You can't touch a drop anymore at all, and so some will become like anything that has to do with alcohol. Some will say, I can't even have mouthwash because there's alcohol in it. So you can't do that at all. You'll find this same mentality with people who may actually need TRT, but have previously been on anabolic steroids and really destroyed their HPTA axis and they can't produce on their own, or would have gone that way anyway as they got older, who will see the testosterone in the same light, like, oh, that's going to harm me. But they don't realize the difference between therapeutic testosterone treatment and the abuse that they had done in the past. And so they kind of still have that mentality going forward, thinking, well, I'm going to do it because it's relieving symptoms, but it's going to shorten my life. And it's like, no, what's going to shorten your life is having low levels of testosterone for the rest of your life, not having optimal under doctor's care testosterone treatment to balance you out, especially if there are other areas of your life failing and you've got deficient levels and all the symptoms to go with it. So I think that's something that I wish would change, but I think it's just part of the nature of that part of society, that people have this mentality.
Yeah, I know it's tough, man. And I've seen, and I used to have this angry lecturing mentality, and now it's like compassionate and caring, and people get mad at me less, but they still get mad at me when I don't tell them what they want to hear, but I tell them what they need to hear. But I don't know any other way to do it, because otherwise you're just kind of, in simple terms, a piece of shit that just doesn't care about people. And so I try to gear myself towards caring and teaching properly, but you can never win, right?
Everyone's got an opinion, and you always find some people that just want to be argumentative. And
I know it.
You try to minimize that, and you're right. Give a lot of love and compassion and support as much as you can. Not everyone wants it. And some people do, some people don't. And I think that's what we try to set up, Balance My Hormones, is when I first started off, it was just me doing all the coaching and the supporting and coordination and administrative types of work. And I always wanted to have the model where it was that one-to-one coaching that I did with the patients. And I wanted to carry that forward. And that kind of made that the ethos of my company. How do we, really be empathetic to the patient that's coming through, and how do we replicate this as we get larger? And that's what we've been able to put together. Awesome. How to support people that way, which is why, and not to sound cliche, but we had a tagline that we have on our boxes for blood tests that say, we support men and women on their journey to optimal hormone balance. And I used to say that in all my videos. I don't think I say it as much anymore, but it's true though. We do try to support people as much as possible when we can. This is tough work for people. I know you've been generous with your time. If I can, I've just got 2 more questions for you, and I'll let you take off because I know you probably got a busy day. And like I said, today's my wife's birthday. Today's over. Yeah, it's about 8 o'clock. Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, this is a 2-part question on the first question, and then the last question is a very short one. At the clinic,
Do you guys do anything with peptides? Because here, I mean, now there's a issue with it, obviously, but it's been one of those things that's like everybody writes a script for it. And then what about Clomid and Clomiphene? Do you guys do anything with that where you try that instead of TRT? I'm not personally a fan of that at all, but I want your opinion on it.
So, all right. So let's talk about peptides. The only peptide that we legally have available in the UK is semaglutide.
Okay.
Wegovy.
Okay.
It's another one. I think there's Sermorelin, but I don't think it's native to the UK, and it's only for diagnostic uses only to test if someone has an HGH deficiency. It's not meant as a therapeutic. So, firstly, whilst we'll have compounding abilities at the hormonist, we won't be compounding anything that's sterile or requires an injection.
Got it.
So that's and I don't think you can do that in the UK. And it would be considered a new medicine. So it's a really gray area in the US, even peptides, because, yes, doctors can prescribe, and some of them have been considered safe, but then you really don't know anything you take in your body. You don't really know all the side effects. And how does it work for one patient that has a condition? What if they're on blood thinners? What if there's something else? We don't know how it all interacts.
Right.
So we can say it's generally safe in a young, healthy population, but what about an older population that's taking it for anti-aging? Do we really know all the potential side effects of this? I mean, the thought is, to be fair, the peptides are naturally within your body, and there's a whole peptide society out there.
Sure. But
as there are with peptides, you can also have that with stem cells and these other doctors that are talking about even doing CRISPR in patients. That's a whole Wild West, that bit of it. So we don't deal with the peptides, until we can, be reassured that they're safe and there's a legal route to having them available.
Understood.
Except for the weight loss, semaglutide, tirzepatide, as it becomes available in the UK. The Clomid and clomiphene bit, that is almost a try before you buy scenario for some patients. They dip their toe in the water. I'm not quite sure about the TRT, but if I boost my levels, and I might feel better before I make a lifelong commitment to TRT. So that can be an option in some cases, but it's not. If you're obese and overweight, it's contraindicated. It's not given at all, because that there can be some risks if you're very heavy with that. I mean, to a certain degree with TRT, but TRT less so. If you're prone to blood clots, definitely no Clomid or Clomiphene for that one. So, but if in a young patient, I have seen patients with clomiphene and Proviron keep the SHBG down whilst the testosterone is going up and have an androgenic effect to offset the zooclomiphene part of clomiphene, because it's a racemic mixture of N-clomiphene and zooclomiphene, with the N-clomiphene not lasting as long but being more androgenic, and the zooclomiphene being a bit more pro-estrogenic, because that's what SERMs are, selective estrogen receptor modulators. So some of it acts like estrogen on the receptor, and some of it acts as an anti-estrogen in the receptor. So if it were just an N-clomiphene, it would be all, for the most part, anti-estrogen on the receptor, especially in the brain. But that alone may cause some effects. So there was Respros Therapeutics, what was it called, Androxyl. They studied this, phase 3 studies, to see if they can use this for therapy, to replace TRT, or they're also going to help reduce diabetes, because again, as we say, if you can raise the testosterone, optimize it, you can maybe help with diabetes. And so so one of the clinical endpoints, I think, was either grip strength or some strange endpoint that they were going for, because that's how you have to set up these studies. And so they said, well, look, we reached, and they also looked at testosterone levels. Like, look, we've raised testosterone levels. And the panel at the FDA said, well, yeah, we know clomiphene can do that, even though as clomiphene gets used, it's off label, because clomiphene originally is for women and fertility to improve ovulation.
Right.
They said, oh yeah, we don't care about the number. And there's to do with so many studies when you're trying to raise levels. Oh, we want to know what the functional outcome is. And so, yeah, great, it raises testosterone. Yeah, that's good, but we're not going to prove it because we can't see how it's improving your walking distance or your grip strength.
Right.
So it's really maddening, because it could have been a good tool in the US. And so in the US I find is your compounding pharmacies there will make it and then use it, because it had gone through phase 3 studies. So I think that one is probably is a bit safer. But I think they also found in this study, as could be with any of these, there may have been some negative outcomes or side effects that was another reason why they said no, don't they didn't approve it. But I mean, it's like tesmorelin as well. Tesmorelin is one that is a peptide that is not really available in Europe. I think it goes by the brand name Igrifta. And the European Union Medicines Agency looked at approving it. And this is so maddening. It's so frustrating because it would have been a good tool for some people. It's prescribed for patients who have lipodystrophy, especially in the midsection, increased visceral fat, who have HIV. And it's a good tool to offset that. And perhaps, it could have been written off label. But the Europeans said, well, we don't like the fact that it raises IGF-1 too much. So as you know, HGH is almost a precursor hormone, and it has its own effects on the body. But you can measure the effects of HGH by looking at something more stable called IGF-1 as it affects as it goes to the liver. IGF-1 is released as of what HGH does. But you say, okay, raise IGF-1. Well, that's exactly what an approved drug called somatropin or HGH does. You give HGH, it raises IGF-1. So what's the difference if tesmorelin raises HGH and then IGF-1 downstream, or if what's already approved on the market is human growth hormone, somatropin raises IGF-1. So it was nonsensical, really, that they denied it based on that fact, and they tried to make a linkage, which isn't necessarily true or found in the literature, that increased or growth hormone levels could cause. Or even a higher IGF-1 doesn't necessarily mean it's going to trigger or cause a cancer. There's always a fear that anything that causes further growth in cells may cause something to grow further. But you can say the same thing about blood vessels. You can say the same thing about blood sugar. If you have cancer, were you going to stop any and all blood sugar? Well, maybe if you use like metformin, you're going to start removing blood vessels. That's why they were using anti-VEGF. But I mean, how far do you go? You start removing oxygen because your body needs it. So until they work out what the exact causes are, I think it's a bit unfair. But there's caution, right? And medicines do no harm. And of course, they're going to be cautious, especially when they're a public body and they don't want to get sued by the legal system or have patients potentially be hurt. So they err on the side of caution.
And man, there's so many peptides. I mean, at this point in time, there's so many peptides because I'm like a SARMs guy. I've been a big SARMs guy. That's kind of what I'm known for in teaching. I mean, I do everything, but peptide. Go ahead.
No, just with the SARMs are once they looked at as a pharmaceutical agent, right? But I mean, it's the same.
They were designed to prevent muscle wastage for AIDS patients, osteoporosis patients. They're really good at allowing you to eat in a deficit and still gain muscle. But that's a money grab, and you know how things are.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic. The
yeah, exactly.
I looked into them before, but I think at the end of the day, the SARMs were okay. They're non-steroidal. You're
right.
You're going towards the androgen as an androgen receptor modulator, selective androgen receptor modulator.
Yeah.
But really, is it doing anything different to what certain anabolic steroids were doing, right? Because they're selected more towards the anabolic properties versus the androgenic properties. And
right.
I think one was maybe to skirt around the Anabolic Steroid Control Act in order to do it, or to have a novel new product. But I think it's off patent anyway now, and so it doesn't matter. And why these SARMs companies pop up, and same thing with the peptide, and I think they're cracking down in the US. Are they not on peptide? Using those in clinical practice.
It's a big thing in clinics right now. The research chemical sites, it's a whole different topic. I did a podcast with Rick Collins, then we talked a ton about that. So and people will be able to see that. But with the peptides right now, they're trying to stop any compounding of it whatsoever. So it's going to be like you can really only get them at research sites. But what happened was, it's kind of like, so I don't know how familiar you are with like the whole pro hormone and the banning, but when pro hormones got banned, people got stuck with hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars of raws that they couldn't do anything with. And so what they started to do was twofold. They shifted towards capsulating SARMs because they found SARMs were so underground and there wasn't a ton of people talking about them. So they shifted to that. But oftentimes they took their pro hormone powders, stuff them in the pills, sell them as SARMs, and then SARMs get this label as, but they cause liver damage and they cause this, when in actuality they don't. but it sure seemed that way because that's what they were selling them as.
I see. Yeah, it's that's out there. So
you
can't.
Some
of these things should be tested, but the whole problem is it's so expensive to bring them to market, and it's just such a cartel of the business model. You want to make a lot of money, you set up a small pharmaceutical company, you come up with some novel IP, and you get gobbled up eventually, sooner rather than later.
Yes,
in most cases. But
I know.
Does that really bring any new value to the market? But the problem is the regulators have made it so difficult and expensive to bring things to market and bring tools to the market that doctors could use.
That's what happened.
You know, unless it's a big, massive win and payoff, no one else can afford to bring them to market, other than being gobbled up by a big pharmaceutical company. So I think that's wrong because it takes away the competition and the variety of options for patients. And then you wait for future treatment. So yeah, it's a strange world, and it's global, and it's not just in the US. So
it sucks, man. Oh, I know. And so the most popular places that I get the SARMs questions from, aside from the US, is strictly the UK and Australia. Yeah. Those are by far the two most prevalent places, and then probably Canada.
We know,
but Australia, UK is extremely popular for questions that I get for SARMs and peptides, but mainly SARMs.
Just kind of educational videos. Ironically, one video I did, I nearly threw away the footage, was how to crack open a glass ampule. And I think it got 100,000, how many? 104,000 views. And I wasn't even going to use
the strange things with SARMs is that they have, most of them are minimally suppressive. There are some like S23 and LGD 3303 that'll suppress you just like a steroid. But what often happens that's wild is the recovery is a lot easier and the side effects are a lot less because they're not toxic to a small degree, some. But I will see blood panels that show FSH and LH rise on cycle and then go way too high after post cycle. Like I'll see LH and FSH in the 6 and 7 ranges, and people starting at 2 and 3, which doesn't make a ton of sense. It's wild. It's hard to tell. And you can, a lot of times if a company puts up a COA, and if anybody doesn't understand certificate of authenticity, you can call and verify that it was actually tested there. There's a few here you can call and say, hey, is this accurate? And they'll tell you. So people that don't know should do that, but it's a whole wild world. It's the Wild West out here, man. Yeah. So what last question I have for you? And then I also want you to give out, and I'll put it in the description, how people can follow you, your YouTube channel, etc. But what's your plans this year on where you're going to be speaking in the United States and the United Kingdom, or where you're going to have events and everything? Because like I said, I'll be speaking with you this year at the Mr. Olympia for sure. Nice. It's awesome. Right. I'm sure. Well, tell us how we can follow you and where to stay up for updates, and also on your website, there's things that you, even if you're not a client, to go check out. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. That'll hit. That's a good one. Yeah. Those are all great. Awesome. And I'll get all of the links from you and I'll put everything in the description so everybody will have them, because it would be very wise and very beneficial to make sure that you follow this man, everybody. I would highly recommend it. Yeah, I'm doing okay. It'll do it. It's taken a long time. That type of thing takes a long time, and you do something once really well, it catches on, and then you boom, it happens really fast. And when people see those numbers, they tend to just follow just cause. Yeah. I mean, thank you. I appreciate it, man. Well, it's been an absolute blast, a pleasure. Every time I talk to you, I learn a ton, and I end up smiling, and I just have a great time. So I appreciate that. And I'm sure the audience does as well. So thank you for your time. Oh yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, once again, Dylan Gemelli Podcast. I invite you all to subscribe. Make sure that you follow Mike. And that being said, Dylan Gemelli and Mike Kocsis signing off.